G'day. Lots of positive comments about my die stock holder, seen here painted, and actually it's turned out quite nicely. But I've also had some people say, well, what about the other part, which is of course the tap holder. In terms of its turning, a little bit simpler, but there are a couple of tricks to it. So I've made one of these once before in the past, but I'll take it apart and run you through making one of these too. So how do these tap handles work? I've got three sizes here. These two are P and N. This one I repainted and cleaned up because it was pretty awful condition. This one I think is a Goliath, but it's the same general principle. So taking this one apart, there's a grub screw which comes out of there, and that actually locates this fixed jaw in place. Then you can unwind that handle, and then it's just a matter of winding this out. Now this is going to be a bit awkward for me, but you can see there's a this handle has got an external screw there, but this jaw has got a left-hand screw, and this is what's called a differential screw. So this bit is going to be easy because I can just single point that, but here I'm going to need a that looks like it's something like a 3/16. I'm going to have to get a 3/16 tap or something to produce the hole in there. But they're basically the parts that make them up. This one is the same. This one is similar. There's no grub screw there, so I don't know quite how that's held in. I've just done the preliminary turning on all the turning on the main body here. That's just a 45-degree angle. I used my button tool. That gives me a nice little radius in there, and I can do all sorts of things with that. Collet chuck, it's nice round bar stock, and it centers it quite nicely. I forget how nice collet chucks are when I don't use them. The other thing worth noting is this thing. This is a tapping head that I made up, and the video for that is coming out soon. It fits onto a shaft which I already use for a button die, but that gives me a lot less wobble with my tap. So I'm hoping that will mean I avoid the problems I had with the button die handle, with these threads not being, concentric with the axis of the part. This now goes over to the mill and gets some flats put on there, and then puts a miller square slot in there, grub screw hole, and that's pretty much finished. It's not a terribly difficult part. The threads in the end are a 5/16 24 TPI, so a UNF thread. Now the set that I've got's a metric thread, which means that even though it had metric dies and things in it, P&M was still producing with imperial, so that's another argument for it to be around about 1970 something or other rather than a later set. So next step of the process done, I've done the handles, or most of the handles. Now this one needs a hole cross drilled in it, and it also needs a thread tapped in the end, but I'm going to leave that until I work out exactly how to put that in there. This one pretty straightforward. One thing that I did do with these, because they're such a long thin length, this was actually taken, it's 5/16 diameter, and I took it down from 10mm. One thing I did do is put a center in the end there, did all my bringing it down to size, putting the knurl on, and then held in the chuck and very carefully parted that off and rounded that over with a file. I mean, not only does that match the original now, it also means that I haven't got a center mark in the end there. So they're my two handles, and they screw in so. Next step in proceedings is to take off a flat, or put a flat on either side of this. Now, this is actually stepped in a little bit, but I'm going to take it flat for the moment because it gives me something better to support on, to hang on to, all that sort of thing. And then as a pretty much almost a last operation, I'll then come in and just take that out. It's only probably 2 or 3 millimeters dishing there, so that shouldn't be a big problem at all. I put the flat on the bottom side and then swapped to a couple of parallels like this, and that's got about a 1/2 inch gap. I now need to put a 3/8 slot in there. I can't get the square corners. I'm going to have to file those. If I had a square broach that size, I'd perhaps give that a go, but file isn't too awful. So what I've done is I've come down with an 8mm drill, just drilled 3 holes, put an 8mm cutter in there, and I'm going to go in and clean that up and then take that out to 3/8 and that out to 29mm now. That's 24, so it's going to be plus or minus 2.5 more that way, and it's going to be plus or minus 0.75 more that way. So because it's a symmetrical part, I'm going to work off the centre line and use my DRO that way. I've put the slot in and filed out the corners, and that was one of the nice things about not having that recess in there. I can just hang on to that and file that, so that's all good. What I'm going to do now, as my second to last thing, is that there's a grub screw that goes in there to hold that V-jaw in, and so while I've got this and it's flat, I'm going to put that in there, and then I'm going to flip it over and put the recess on there as my last operation on this particular part. To line it up, that's the whole position, that's centered, and then all I did to get the position there was actually put a square through onto the bottom of that surface, and then I'm going to come up 1/4 inch, and so its locating is reasonably simple, provided you think about what surface you want that relative to. As you can see, I flattened that out and then used a ball nose cutter to put those scallops in. Don't really like doing it that way because you do tend to get a bit of a witness mark. I'll just polish that with a bit of emery, I think, to get rid of that. I much prefer a cutter with a radius, or I have occasionally done this sort of thing, standing at an edge like that and coming in with a cutter to just sweep along there like that. There's my tap handle main body all done. Bit of clean up. Certainly had to work the corners with a triangular file just to get them so that the anvils, die pieces, whatever you want, would actually sit nicely in there. But that's all right. The next part to make, or the next parts to make, are these two. Now, that one's relatively straightforward. It's a bit of square stock. This one has got a left-hand thread on it, so I'm going to have to go back and single point that. When I have small parts out of square stock to make, I actually go to a bit of key steel. This is a bit of 12mm key steel. These are going to be 9.8, so 10 is probably getting a little bit dicey. But key steel, it's in its basic form is usually something like 1040. So you know, I think it's a medium carbon steel. It'll blacken up quite nice. It'll harden. So you know, it's probably not a bad choice for doing something like this. And I find that, you know, it's one of the few ways you can actually buy small pieces of you know, a square stock. So worth remembering. Anyway, I'm going to just take the outside off to get those parts. Go back to the lathe. Part one off about that long for this piece, and then leave the rest of it here to single point thread before coming back and parting that off. Back on lathe cam now, and I'm just about to single point thread the left-hand thread on this particular nut. It goes reasonably well up to the top, but there's a counterboard section of the bit that it goes into, so there's a bit of clearance there for me. So anyway, we'll have a go at that and see how we go. This is one of those occasions where people who advocate, you know, putting a tool upside down and running your lathe in reverse, it won't work because it's a left-hand thread. If you're doing it that way, you're going to have to work towards the chuck. So you might as well learn how to do it the conventional way. In this case, you're for a left-hand thread, you're working away from the chuck, so it makes it a little bit easier. All I need to do now is blacken these up, and the best thing I've discovered for doing that actually is two-stroke oil. So I've got a bit in the tin here, heat this up. So there you go, nice and black. Sadly, that's where this build ends, because in order to finish it I need to put a 1024 left-hand thread in here, and I haven't got a tap because it's the Christmas season here in Australia. Shops are shut, so it's going to be a couple of weeks at least before I can get one of those. However, if I put everything together with the handle out of my set, works beautifully. So, you know, there it is, a matching set tap wrench, I guess. So, you know, I'll get that one tapped and off we go. Thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hang on for the next one.